Hi, I'm Nate Regier, CEO and founding owner of Next Element Consulting, a global firm dedicated to transforming cultures with compassionate accountability. On this show, we're going to talk about how compassion and accountability are not at odds. And I'll teach you 3 switches to power up your effectiveness as a leader. And finally, how compassion and accountability can be applied even during times of war, and much more. Stay tuned.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Baron. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you. Dov Baron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Baron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty podcast. I'm your host, Dov Baron. I'm here to assist you, tapping into the one thing in your business that changes everything by transforming meaning into action. On that subject, I have an announcement for you. Our brand new course is out. It's just been released. It's on coursifyx.com. coursifyx.com/belonging is titled Creating a Culture of Belonging. This course is sort of broken down, separated into 8 sections, and really taking you by the hand and walking you through exactly what it will take for you to create a culture of belonging inside of your organization. Because creating a culture of belonging maximizes your personal and corporate success. Get ready to strap the tanks on to dive right in and take your deep dive into how to create a culture of belonging inside of your organization. Curious to know more? Simply go to coursifyx.com/belonging. That's coursifyx.com/belonging. All right, on to today's show. As leaders, I think one of the most challenging things we have to do is we have to hold people accountable. And I can tell you that in all the years of all the leaders I've worked with, I don't think I've ever met a leader who didn't wish they didn't have to hold people accountable and that they would simply do it for themselves. Why can't people be accountable for themselves? We hear that all the time. But we all know that's not actually how it works. Holding team members accountable can end up feeling a lot like a parent telling off or punishing a child, and no one enjoys that. Not the leader, not the person who's being held accountable. So is there a way to effectively hold a team member accountable without turning it into some kind of dysfunctional parent-child relationship? Well, we're about to find out with our upcoming guest, Dr. Nate Regier. Now, before I dive in, as always, we need your help in staying relevant, so please do us a favor, because it really matters. Get over to wherever you tune into the podcast from, rate, review, and subscribe to the show. If you are a regular listener, big thank you to you. I really appreciate it for making us the #1 podcast globally for Fortune 500 listeners, according to Apple. And we are honored and grateful to be cited by Inc.com as the #1 podcast to make you a better leader. So we need your help, so please do that. It makes a difference. All right, on to today's show. Let's dive in. The Great Resignation, quiet quitting, remote working, they've all made accountability more important than ever. But how can we hold people accountable in a very adult way? How can we hold people accountable and actually do it with compassion? Well, the answer is something that our guest has been dedicated to, not only discovering, but implementing. Our guest for the next 2 episodes is Dr. Nate Regier. He and his team at Next Element have pioneered a compassionate accountability framework, ushering in a new paradigm of leadership that helps organizations to thrive in complex and challenging environments. Nate Regier is the CEO and founder and owner of Next Element Consulting, a global leadership consulting and training firm helping build cultures of compassionate accountability. Dr. Nate is the founder and he's a former and practicing psychologist and expert in social emotional intelligence, interpersonal communication, conflict skills, and leadership. Recognized as a top 100 keynote speaker, he is a process communication model certified master trainer. He hosts a podcast called On Compassion with Dr. Nate. It's a great show. I highly recommend that you go listen to it. If you're a fan of this, you'll certainly love that. And part of it is I'm a little bit biased. I was a guest on the show. It is a great show. Nate does a superb job. I really recommend it. He's the author of 4 books: Beyond Drama, Conflict Without Casualties, Seeing People Through, and his newest book, surprise, surprise, is called Compassionate Accountability. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and help me to welcome returning champion, Dr. Nate Regier.
Oh, man, it's great to be here, Dov.
Always enjoy our conversations, mate, very much. You are a guest of honor. It's lovely to have you back. Where I always like to start the show, because I think it's so important and so often forgotten about, is, life is about meaning. And we live in a world, I've said this before, the person who dictates the meaning dictates the movement of the individual or of the group. And I don't think we take enough time to stop and ask ourselves what it is that gives our lives meaning. So what is the origin story of what gives your life meaning?
Wow. Thank you for asking that. And, reflecting on this question, I realize I've been giving hints about this in every book. I like to tell a little bit about my life, and every book shares a little bit, but here's the origin story. So my parents were missionaries in Africa with the Mennonite church. And those who know what the Mennonite denomination is, it's a Judeo-Christian denomination that focuses a lot on pacifism, nonviolence, living by example. And so I was raised and indoctrinated into always turn the other cheek, never resort to violence. And yet I grew up in parts of the world that had significant strife. South Africa in the 1980s during apartheid when Nelson Mandela was in prison. And so I, from early age, could not reconcile this idea of just be nice and what about the behaviors? This is not the kind of world we want to live in. So that is where I've been trying to crack that nut and solve that problem my entire life. And I think it really culminated in 2019 before the pandemic when our team came together and said, look, we've been doing Next Element for 11 years. Why are we here? What is our meaning? What is our purpose? How are we going to do the next 10 years? And we didn't know that the pandemic was going to hit. And what we decided in that retreat was, as our mission had always been, was to bring more compassion to every workplace. We had no idea what that was going to look like, but we knew we had to find a way. And then all hell broke loose. And, but I guess that's my origin story of what gives me meaning. And that's what I get up every single day trying to figure out. How can we get compassion into more people's hands?
I find that fascinating because I do believe that it's usually meaning comes from inner turmoil. It's not usually from, the clouds open. It's this conflict within us. Mm-hmm. And for you, it was this, turn the other cheek. But if you keep turning the other cheek, you just end up with a lot of black eyes and 2 sore cheeks. Mm-hmm. And so you were looking for what was the practicality to them. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think my personality by nature is always seeking the practical, pragmatic solution. And yet the values I was raised with were to be sensitive to injustice, to care about righting the wrongs in the world, and to be an example of there's got to be a better way.
And how old were you when you lived in South Africa?
I was in high school I was in Botswana, actually, which bordered South Africa. But earlier, I lived in Zaire, and my younger years were in the Democratic Republic of Congo.
Wow. I did not know that about you, Nate. You and I have had so many conversations, and I did not know about that. In Zaire. It's just one of my favorite Peter Gabriel songs. In Zaire. It's a great song. There was a lot of unknown about that part of the world. The Congo and Zaire and certainly South Africa. One of my guests was actually served on the parliament under Nelson Mandela, and that was fascinating about that change. And to be sort of in that service at that time for you must have been, as a teenager, I can't imagine that as a teenager, because you would have your own inner turmoil as just being a teen. And then seeing this turn the other cheek and seeing this behaviors that were so
Yeah.
It's really, really, I can see how that would be so catalyzing.
Well, Botswana, I lived in Botswana, which bordered South Africa, and it was the only functioning Black democracy in Africa at the time. Also, yeah, it was also a refuge for political refugees fleeing South Africa because of their beliefs, because of their resistance to apartheid. And so regularly, I can count several times there was a car bombing during the night, and I would walk past that car on the way to school. I remember one time, literally it must have happened early in the morning, and I walked past an acacia tree with pieces of flesh and clothes stuck to the thorns of the tree above the car that had blown up. This is the kind of environment where it's like, how do you reconcile this?
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. How do you reconcile that as a teen, walking past that? What do you tell yourself? Because you're getting the messages, again, from the Mennonite and who's on the other cheek. Well, how do you talk to yourself about that?
I've never been the kind of person that would, have the placards and stand on the street corner and do the big advocacy or lead these massive movements. But I always felt like change happens in every relationship, and I can be a catalyst of a different way of being. I don't have to participate in this. I don't have to be part of the hate. I don't have to. Can we cultivate relationships where people start to think differently? And I often have thought that sometimes violence is a result of just not knowing a better way, not feeling like you have any other alternative. This is just what we do.
Yeah.
And so I was a large person. I mean, I'm 6'4", pretty big guy in high school. A lot of times when there would be conflicts or things going on, if it got physical, I probably could have prevailed had I chosen to. So that made it even harder to choose to turn the other cheek, because I probably could have gotten my way physically.
Right. For me, that is just a fascinating piece. I'm sure we could probably talk for a couple of hours on that on its own. But I want to bring it back to the book's title, because, I talked about in the beginning, in the introduction, that I don't know any leader who particularly enjoys accountability, because they feel like it's like punishing a child. It feels, why can't you do this yourself? Why do I have to hold you accountable? And, you've put these two words together, compassionate and accountability. It seems like in many ways that if a person sees this, it's like, a person being a leader says, this is just another one of those books where we're supposed to just let people get away with shit because there's been a pandemic, because there's been a great resignation, et cetera, et cetera. So we're just going to let people off, and we as leaders are pretty impotent. So what do we do?
Right. Well, when people see those two words together, often there's two reactions. The first one is, what's this? Like a confusion. The second reaction is almost this sense of, well, what if? What if? And I heard somebody had a great description of this dilemma. After they read the book, we did some work together. They said, so compassion is not an adjective to soften accountability. It's like, no, this is not accountability with a soft edge. These are two things that come together on the fundamental belief we have that these two are not actually in tension. They're not actually opposites. It is our human creation to put them at odds, but that's not the intention. That's not even the original purpose of compassion.
So talk to us about that, because I think that is confusing for people. Can you sort of walk us into that a little bit more?
Well, let's go back to South Africa during apartheid. So diversity. I believe that diversity is part of the grand design of the universe. Differences are here because it makes us better, because there's a purpose, because, if you look at evolution, wouldn't happen without diversity. All of the great things we've developed in the world wouldn't have happened without diversity of thought and perspective. So if we believe that diversity is a purposeful part of the meaning of the universe, well, then we have to also accept that the conflict is an inevitable outcome of diversity. If you put differences in a room, there's going to be conflict. So Conflict must therefore have a purpose. There must be meaning in conflict. And so that's where our first research started looking is, how do people view conflict? What happens with it? What even is it? And that's where we recognize that conflict, all it is the energy in the gap between what we want and what we're experiencing. That's all it is.
We'll say that again, because I want that to land for people. I want to underline that. If you're listening right now, hit pause, wind back 10 seconds, listen again, write it down, please.
What if we stripped away all of our associations with conflict and saw it for what it really is? Conflict is simply the energy in the gap between what we want and what we're experiencing at any point in time. I want to be to work at 8 o'clock and I'm experiencing 15 people in front of me in the Starbucks drive-thru. We got a problem. That's conflict. And there's energy. My heart's pounding. I'm having all these thoughts. I'm going to be late. My team's going to think I don't care. Oh my gosh. So the real question is not whether conflict is good or bad. The question is, what shall we do with this energy?
Right.
And that is where we have a choice. And that's where we've kind of identified that there's two options. We can use that energy in drama.
Mm-hmm.
And we see where that takes us. Apartheid, war, all of this kind of stuff. Or we can use that energy to create, which is, I think, what humans are here on this earth to do. We're creators. We're here to create.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been given this incredible energy source, which is conflict. It's like, and so the question then becomes, well, how do we use the energy of conflict to create? And that's where we landed on, well, compassion. That is the thing. It's the toolkit. It's what we've been given as the way.
Well, when you were on last time, we talked a lot about conflict, and you and I both have, in agreement, very different ways of looking at conflict than is generalized, is the way more people think about it. I would say there is no relationship without conflict. It requires conflict in order for us to grow, deepen our levels of trust with each other as well. And so I'm fully in agreement with you here, but I'm still back to this piece, which aligns with the accountability piece, which is that people are terrified of conflict.
Yes.
And so you're saying, okay, but it's the energy in the middle that will create so many wonderful things.
Yeah.
But that's still standing on the edge of the cliff saying it's safe to jump.
Well, let's take a look.
A lot of people are going to go, yeah, okay, that theoretically sounds great, Nate, but I don't want to do conflict with this person, and so I don't know how to do it because I'm scared of it, or they're scared of it, or we're scared of it.
Well, and what I have to say to that is, I hear you. I don't blame you. You've seen terrible things. You've been part of these things. You've seen conflict turn into drama and people get hurt. And you don't want that. Nobody wants that. It's not fun. It might be predictable and we might get what we want in the short term, but it's not a meaningful life. It's not a purposeful life.
No.
So the last piece of the puzzle before I think we can talk about the how is to look at 3 ways in which we misuse conflict.
Right.
And they all start with the word struggle. When there's conflict, we could struggle against each other and we could turn everything into an adversarial win-lose situation. Look at what's going on right now. 2 wars in our world where conflict has been turned into an adversarial. Somebody's going to win, somebody's going to lose, but everybody gets hurt. That's one way. But there's another way, is to struggle instead of. So there's a conflict and I come swooping in saying, here, let me help you. Here, let me do it for you. Here, let me solve the problem. Here, let me tell you how it's done. And by doing that, we rescue people and remove all possibility of that conflict turning into something generative. We take away the struggle.
Yeah.
So, but there's another way. One third way in which struggle always ends bad is struggling alone. We're carrying something, a pain, a hurt, a story, a narrative, an experience, and we choose to keep it inside because we tell ourselves, well, nobody would understand, or they'll judge me, or I don't feel safe telling them, or here's my favorite, they have enough of their own problems. I don't want to burden them with mine. And so we just suffer, we struggle alone. So struggling against, struggling instead of, and struggling alone are all misuses of conflict energy because they miss the entire purpose, which is what compassion really means. When you go back to the Latin root, compassion means with suffer.
With suffer, yeah.
So we can struggle against, we can struggle instead of, we can struggle alone, and it always turns out bad, or we can struggle with. What if we saw conflict as an opportunity to struggle with somebody to create something new?
So let me see if I grasp this in a way that might translate, or maybe not, and please correct me if I'm wrong. In many ways, when we struggle with, we look at not you're the problem, not I'm the problem, but there is a problem, and we are coming together to solve the problem, the separate entity, so that there is an entity here that is a problem. It's not you, it's not me, and that takes the ego out of it, takes the sense of feeling like the persecutor or the victim, but rather that we are going to come together with the compassion that you have a different way of looking at it than I do, but we're still dealing with the same problem that we can solve together. Is that a fair understanding of it?
Yeah, that's fair. And it sets up the recognition and the realization that we can accomplish two things at the same time. One of them is to come together.
Yes.
In other words, know each other, appreciate each other, affirm each other, become closer, build trust. And the other thing we're doing is we're actually holding ourselves accountable for what needs to be brought into the world, which is what's next. So compassionate accountability is the process of building connection while we're getting results.
Building connection while we're getting results. Very good.
If you think about some of the experiences in your life, and this is to all the listeners out there, the ones where you felt the most joy, the most intimacy with people, the most sense of, man, we've done something amazing, it's because you struggled together. It's not because you won. No. It's because you struggled together, and there was an intimacy created by the struggle.
Yeah, it's the bonding in trauma. It's what happens with people who go to war together. The soldiers stand side by side at the shoulder of a brother or sister. Is there because they struggled together. And there's a bond that happens in struggling together that doesn't happen anywhere else. And it's that commitment. Now, I know that because you and I talked about it, you've been really researching heavily in compassionate accountability, and you've been teaching it, and you have been able to identify sort of 3 switches, you called them, I believe, for a compassionate mindset. Because I think that that's, again, part of the challenge. And I say this to people all the time. We throw around these words, empathy, compassion, authenticity.
Right.
Nobody knows what the hell they really mean. And of course, they interpret them. And then they throw that around. Well, I'm being authentic. No, you're being a dick.
Yeah.
That's who I am. That's not authentic.
Yeah.
That's stuck. Compassion and empathy are kind of the same thing. They get lost. So when you were able to do this research and find out these sort of 3 switches for the mindset, can you tell us more about those?
Yeah, we asked ourselves, we went back over 15 years of training, and we asked ourselves, what is the difference between a smart, motivated, capable, and competent human being that, when given an opportunity to learn and grow, flies with it, and a person sitting right next to them? Excuses, criticism, skepticism, trying to sabotage it, won't try, whatever. What's the difference between these two people that are equally competent, capable? And what we realized is it's mindset. And, deep down, it's what you call emotional source code. It is really what are our deepest beliefs about where meaning comes from, who we are, how we deal with stuff. And what we realized is these people had a particular mindset. They saw themselves and others in a unique way. And they maintained that attitude no matter what. And so those became the 3 switches.
So there's 3 unshakable beliefs, values that this person holds. Is that right?
Well, they're shakeable. But the question is, they're always shakeable, but the question is, they're fundamental and foundational. And when we believe them and when we act on them, things are different.
Okay.
And what we identified was the difference in this mindset is value, capability, and responsibility. And I'll explain each one. Value means that we believe fundamentally that human beings are innately, unconditionally valuable, independent of their behavior. Now, it doesn't mean we don't talk about the behavior, we don't talk about the performance, but who they are and what they do is separable.
There's an intrinsic value.
Intrinsic value because you're human.
Right.
That's great, but that's just the beginning. Humans are also capable. We are agentic human beings that come with ideas and education, training and wishes and dreams and aspirations and potential. So the fundamental belief is every human being is capable of contributing and being part of the solution under the right conditions.
There's the pause, right? Under the right conditions.
Which means it's a two-way street, which means as a leader, as a parent, as a coach, if I believe you're capable, then I am striving to find the conditions where you thrive and you reach your potential. But we're not just capable. Because we're humans working together in communities, our behavior matters, which means we're responsible. So that is the third switch, is the fundamental belief is no matter what happened before, I'm 100% responsible for my thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. So there is this fundamental ownership over what comes next that I have control over and releasing the rest. No more, no less. And that's a really fine line that gives leaders fits, is either taking on too much responsibility for other people's crap or not enough for their own.
So that is exactly where I was going to go there, Nate, because I think that, forgive me, but you're asking a lot there, because you're asking someone to discern where that line is, and a lot of the times we can't do that. I mean, I'm just holding this person accountable.
Yeah.
No, you're now micromanaging.
Yeah.
No, I'm being compassionate. No, you are just creating it so that this person can walk all over you. And I see this in primary relationships between partners, let alone in a business sense. So help us with that part, because that's difficult.
Yeah. Well, can I illustrate with a short story?
Please.
So the first time this really hit the head for me was when my youngest daughter was about 9 months old, year old maybe. And bedtime was really a challenge. It was always a struggle with us. She seemed to escalate during bedtime, would always get more wound up. And so we were often at our wits' end trying to figure out how to hold her accountable to go to bed. One night I remember I'm standing in our hallway and I can see into my daughter's bedroom and I can see into my wife's in my bedroom. She's in bed looking at me like, Dad, this is on you. You get her to bed. And my daughter's looking at me like, you can't make me stay in my bed. So I'm feeling like in this pressure cooker, like I feel like a fool, like incompetent in front of my wife.
Yeah.
And I feel like I'm going to have to bring the hammer down on my daughter to make her respect me. And I tried lots of things, the usuals. And finally I realized I'm losing this. I'm falling apart. So then I asked myself, what if I took 100% responsibility for just my crap? No more, no less. And what I realized is the thing I was not owning was my feelings of incompetence as a dad. I wasn't owning it. I was hiding it. I was trying to cover it up. My wife's looking at me like, can you figure this out? And I'm feeling like I can't. And my daughter's looking at me like, you can't make me. And I'm saying, I'll show you. And so I tried something I've never tried before, which was take responsibility for my own feelings. And I said to my wife, I don't know what to do. I'm going to try something different. And I said to my daughter, everything I've tried hasn't worked. And I feel incapable as a dad. Will you help me figure out how you sleep best?
How old is your daughter at this point?
She's a year old. Maybe about a year. She can understand. Maybe 2, I don't know. Old enough to have stuffed animals and be on her bed and everything.
Yeah, sure.
And my wife looked at me with these big eyes and I said, I don't know what else to do. I'm going to go to bed and I'm going to let you come tell me when you have it figured out because you know you better than I do. And my wife was like, what? You're going to let her run around the house and get into the knives and blah, blah, blah. And I said, I need to go to bed because I'm tired. 5 minutes later, my daughter comes in and says, Daddy, come check this out. And she says, look how I arranged my bed. My stuffed animals are going to read me a story. And this one did, and I got my blanket and blah, blah, blah. And I said, amazing. I am so proud of you. And I left and she put herself to sleep. And from that day on, she put herself to sleep every night. And it couldn't have happened without me stopping, struggling alone, struggling against, and struggling instead of. And I just took ownership over my own stuff and asked for help. And we struggled together.
That's a beautiful illustration of that. That's really a beautiful illustration. It seems to me like in so much of this process that you're talking about, it is, yes, it's compassionate accountability, but it's also completely empowering and stepping out of, because accountability in the form that we've known is about stepping into, I'm going to take over this and I'm going to punish you and hold you accountable, versus stepping out and saying, I'm going to empower you. Like, what is the solution? And I want to talk in the next part of the show when we come back in part 2, I want to talk about the resistance to that.
Yeah.
Because it's important. Because, there are a lot of people who want to rebel against authority. Understand that? I'm a rebel too. There are also people who want to rebel not because they're rebellious, but because they can't get their own ego out of the way.
Right.
And they want to rebel against somebody who's actually trying to help them. So I want to talk a little bit about that because I want to sort of dive into where is the line of compassion versus tattooing welcome on your back so people can wipe their feet.
Right. Right.
Okay, Nate, it's been amazing first part of the show. Thank you so much, sir. Please tell our listeners where they can find out more about you and about all the ways to reach out to you, all your wonderful resources.
We try to make it really simple. next-element.com. Everything is there. Easy to find. And of course, if you want to Google Nate Regier, you can find me. If you want to Google compassionate accountability, we're going to come up and you'll find me that way as well.
Fabulous. We're going to talk more with Dr. Nate about compassionate accountability right after the break. You now can just simply sit back for a moment, take a couple of notes, because there's a lot in there. I mean, we've already brought up a lot of things for you to really discover here. And we're going to be back in just one click. So stay curious, my friends. Stay curious.